Welcome to 155, the podcast formerly known as Blink 155, and I think we're allowed to say that sometimes. I'm going to allow that sometimes.
I noticed that, the barrier is becoming more and more porous.
We're not going to only in these like kind of standalone things will we mention it, but not in the main ones. Like, Dave Friday from Great British Bake Off, we're allowed to say the B word when he's on here. But if it's like the main episode, Bake 182. Yes, exactly. No, wait, look, I feel like this is sort of a misconnections thing that keeps happening. The ones that got away when we were in the initial episode run, That's
fair. I mean, this was like hanging over you, I think, emotionally for a really long time, maybe for the last 35 years. Who knows? So I think the idea of this being part of you letting go, of a former life, emerging as a beautiful butterfly with 3 to 4 interests instead of 1 to 2, which was, of course, Blink 182 and. In my mind, time.
What's
crisis.
The other one? Oh yeah, true. I mean, yeah. Is
that true?
Ultimately, I think what Blink 155 was about for me was who's the most hilarious, incongruous person that I can make talk in depth about Blink 182. And I do think we got pretty much the most ridiculous ones.
I think you found the most incongruous people.
American poet Edward Hirsch, the Billy Idol impersonator, the deadhead 50-year-old man named Sam Sutherland because it's the same name as you. We found them all, but
good guy, by the way. Still sends me my errant emails. Truly decent man.
I didn't really listen to any spoken radio or podcasts before we started, and I'm thankful that I didn't because I think I would have been so insecure in establishing the tone of our show because then I would be oh, they already did that on there or whatever. So I'm glad that I didn't do that, but I did start listening to Time Crisis pretty soon after, and I was like, shit, this is I don't want to say it's our cousin because I feel like I'm working through some sort of cousin narrative right now.
Yes, you have to find something fresh for sure.
They're our pen pals or something, or they're foreign exchange students from America that we haven't really. I don't know what it is, but it's just they're the kind of the nicer version of us, I think, is the safe way to say it. We're the mean Time Crisis, pretty much. And so
sure, yeah, that nicer, slightly more successful. I mean, but starting on second base, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Our quest for fame we were starting in the dugout, Mm-hmm. We were ball boys.
Yeah, I think for me, being just a reader of Hipster Runoff and Ezra being kind of the main character of that website, sort of that's a different realm. So I've got to give us credit for what we've accomplished in the post irony sphere since starting this. But definitely, I always wanted to talk to Ezra. That's not the only reason why I did this slick move last week. I mean, obviously it's part of it, but you wanted to take last week off, and there's just this buzz happening in our community of our podcast, which honestly, you don't go in the Discord, it's buzzing at all hours. People are talking to each other, but also they're helping each other with their covers, and they're helping each other with life discussions and stuff. It's a beautiful community that's already popped off since we rebranded in November. So the momentum is crazy. So I was we can't stop this train. And I knew that it was going to be kind of a gold rush, so to speak, of who would be the first one to do something with Vampire Weekend having a song called 2021. So it was just so perfect to do it. So you did nothing last week, I think, basically, right? I mean, you just kind of.
So we took time off so I could aggressively take time off myself.
Yeah, so you did that, and
I really feel like I have to defend myself.
You don't. I mean, I'm saying
it's you and the nation a little bit.
I'm jealous of that because what I did instead was create another scenario where I'm receiving large wave format emails, and then 15 minutes later getting mix 2, all caps, final, and then mix 3. I swear to God, this is the last one, or whatever.
I just like that a narrative of the new podcast has been that it was initially an attempt to do less work, and that every week you take on more and more and more work, and it's because it's exciting and it's fun. But even on a week off where you were like, well, I guess I can't do the work that I would do if Sam and I were working together. So I'm going to create sort of as much work as possible without there actually being a podcast.
Yeah, and
I admire it,
and it worked because we got Ezra on the pod. So I'm going to talk to Ezra in a minute. We also once again have been posted on Stereo Gum today,
and this time they tagged both of our personal accounts in it.
Yeah, that feels like something for sure.
Like Stereo Gum knows who I am, you know.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
But I did notice, I don't forget if it was on Stereo Gum or like we keep getting posted on Indie Heads Reddit now too. Like we're like just like we're big indie now, Sam.
Well, it's because we're indie heads.
Yeah, we are. We're
Head recognizes head.
All r/ to that, I guess, could be a Reddit thing to say. I don't know. But I did notice somewhere that someone commented like, I don't really understand what this is, but I'm glad people are having fun. And I think there's a lot of people who are big-time Ezra heads, big-time 2021 heads, or maybe even Time Crisis heads who are here, don't understand what it is that we do. Maybe it's someone from r/indie heads or r/this exists. Does that exist? Is there? Do you have an r/?
Yeah. It hasn't been active for a long time, but yeah, there's this sub. Yeah, it has a subreddit.
Damn, bro. So I guess to do the very, very quick abbreviated version, I mean, I'm going to let you do it.
What people are listening to right now?
Like what is going on? Maybe you, I think it would be funny if I made you do it, actually.
Okay, so like you and I were not friends, and then we started a Blink-182 podcast called Blink-155, wherein we commented quite in depth on every single Blink-182 song. When we started, there were 155 songs. By the end, there were
174.
What was the final number?
174.
I have no idea. So we ended up having to do 174 episodes. Never missed a week. Never missed a single week, which is why taking last week off was such a big deal. To be fair, I took 1 week off over the course of Blink-155, and you did all the small things solo. So, credit to you for
yeah. So the narrative you're describing is not a new one. Is basically what you're saying. It's kind of
no, exactly. Ultimately, we're just sort of returning to our roots here. So we wrapped up in November with "Damn It" and a compilation of how many covers of "Damn It" were on that compilation?
I don't remember. I have no idea.
Like 30 something, kind of curated all the guests that have been on the pod. Great comp, got written glowing praise for this compilation. It made you in particular, I think, compilation crazy. I mean, like I also
you just like you became slightly Trumpian right there for a second. Glowing praise for this compilation.
Yeah, it's the best. It's, the people say it's the best Blink-182 compilation they've ever heard. The finest covers. Finest. He doesn't say that. I'm not good at this.
Tremendous, I think he says.
Yeah, tremendous covers. So we put that out. We took all of like 5 days off. And then came back because you and I cannot, because now we're friends and we just need to talk. And so 155 is an exploration of punk music. Every week we do a new song in depth on it, and people record covers.
Yeah,
we put a cover compilation every single week.
So leading up to the Damn It compilation was guests of our show. But prior to that, we had done this thing over this. I mean, it's impossible to explain, but if you're still listening and you're waiting for that sweet, sweet Ezra, just keep listening. But we also did like 60 covers of Hinder Lips of an Angel over the course of the summer.
Like $10,000 for Black Lives Matter.
And that was our listeners contributing to that. And so there's kind of been, ever since then, there's been this energy that our listeners are just ravenous to create content for us. And folks, that's helping pay the bills, baby. No, I'm just kidding. But what it actually is they do want to keep doing covers all the time. And they used to like plant covers of the Blink-182 songs we would talk about on YouTube. So we were like, well, let's just make it so our listeners can just cover. We'll just tell them what song we're going to do, and then they can cover it. So, I mean, it feels like it's still a pretty new idea, but the energy has been ridiculous. I mean, I think we must have already released 100 songs over the course of December. Do you think?
I think so. Yeah, it's like a staggering number. I mean, how many, like, who's Avril Lavigne? Like, how many songs were there on that compilation?
Yeah, there was like, I don't know, like 30 or something. It's fucked.
It's fucking intense.
And they're all good too. That's the other stressful thing that's making the work so worthwhile and so exhausting. So basically, every week, people are told what song they can do. We have this Discord community where they can sort of, run ideas off one another and give each other tips and tricks. And so that's where this Vampire Weekend 2021 compilation was born. And the idea was kind of, maybe that's not really a punk song, but if it's not a punk song, we usually talk about punk songs and people turn them into like bullshit, like ambient music or whatever. So what if we go the other way around and start with bullshit indie music? No, I'm just kidding. start with indie music and turn it into punk music. So that's kind of what we did here. And it worked, baby. So if you want to listen to our podcast, I mean, it doesn't matter if you know the song or not every week, I think. But I think it's a lot of fun.
I agree. I think we've now done several episodes where you don't know the song, which is like not the narrative that I expected to come from me.
Right. Pretentious Sammy. That's your new persona.
It turns out, right? So I think there are a variety of ways to experience this podcast. You can either be like Josiah, such a normie, only knows the hits. Me, kind of esoteric knowledge, so very smart.
It's kind of true. I mean, Sam has written a book on punk music, and I have not. So
yeah, it's true. Just wait till like I'm just like really trying to flex for some reason, and I'm like, this episode is going to be about.
It's possible that someone
from Newfoundland,
somebody could come into the podcast now and have no clue about our 174 episode personae, and then have like a whole new version.
This is an opportunity. This is like going to a new school.
It's kind of interesting, but I think the cracks will eventually show, and the facade will be lifted. It'll be clear.
Yeah, that's fair. It might take another 3.5 years, but it's going to happen.
Anyways, here's me talking to Ezra Koenig. All right, I'm very excited. This is another one. We had Dave Friday from the Great British Bake Off was one that got away. We've got another one that got away from the initial run of our show, who is back. We've lured him in. It was the perfect trap, and it worked. We set the bait, and it worked. I'm so excited to welcome you to what is now called 155. Welcome, Ezra Koenig.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's an honor.
So you escaped. You managed to not get tricked into going on our show when we were a Blink-182 podcast, but I'm going to pretend that we still are just for a second because I've spoken with American poet Edward Hirsch. I've spoken with Phil Elverum. I've spoken with Dan Reynolds from Imagine Dragons. I mean, you're one of the only people missing that I have not ever spoken to about what is your take on the band Blink-182.
Well, first of all, I knew I would come on this podcast at some point. I mean, once we'll talk about it later, but with the 2021 compilation, I felt like the time is now. Quit putting it off. But my take on Blink-182 is I'm a fan.
You are.
Always liked them. Met, I feel like I met Mark, but maybe we never actually met. Definitely met Tom before. When we actually interviewed him. Somewhere there's footage of like us interviewing Tom in 2009. We're basically leading into this. This is some very rare shit. In fact, I think I have the hard drive somewhere, but leading into Contra, our second album, which, in very broad strokes, I saw as kind of like a California album or like informed by California music. And, before I'd really spend much time here, it was very exotic. And we did this whole thing where we made like a mini documentary where we interviewed iconic California musicians. So somewhere on a hard drive, there's me talking to Tom DeLonge. There's Bayo interviewed Fieldy from Korn.
Oh my God.
This is like a lost classic. But anyway, yeah. So I met Tom a long time ago. Thought he's a fascinating guy. And before that, I was just always a fan of the music.
So like,
I always had a soft spot for them.
I mean, I'm gonna call your bluff a little bit just because I want to know like what's your album, what's your era or album or like your pants style for Blink-182.
Well, I mean, I always say take off your pants and jacket just because it's such a brilliant title. I mean, to really clarify my relationship to Blink-182, I probably never like owned an album. I probably had like MP3s of most of Enema of the State. I like when they came out, it was a funny thing because I was so into pop punk before I'd heard of them, but a little more like, I don't know, like East Coast, like my favorite band when I was in middle school was Bouncing Souls.
Oh my God.
So like that was kind of my way in. Like, yeah, Maniacal Laughter by Bouncing Souls is one of my like top 10 albums. Yeah, at different points in my life. So I always loved Bouncing Souls. So you can imagine I was a little bit of like a pop punk hipster.
That's the other question I always ask is like, was there a time you were too cool for Blink-182? So it was right from the get-go.
Well, here's the thing. When I started to see like other kids at school, so picture like a year or something after I'm like really into like Bouncing Souls and that kind of shit. And then, and like ska punk, like Voodoo Glow Skulls and shit like that. And then Blink-182 gets really big. I was maybe like a little bit too cool to go all in, but I also was like too taken with them to hate. So I was kind of just like, I'm not going to buy the CD, but when I had like a friend who was really in, I was kind of like, yeah, this rules. You know what I mean? Like where
absolutely.
I wasn't going to wear a t-shirt. I was like a little too proud maybe to be like, well, okay. But I also had to admit like, these are great songs.
It was a confusing time because when I was a teenager, I was really into like the Locust and the Blood Brothers and that kind of stuff. And so I thought that I was way too cool for Blink-182, but I was secretly going home and listening to Enema of the State all the time.
I mean, yeah, and the fact that they had a sense of humor, it's like, it's tough when like there's like a really big band and they're humorless, but it's like, you know, aliens exist. In some ways, that's my favorite Blink song. It's just like, I just find it so funny. It still pops into my head all the time. If I ever hear the phrase in any context, "Hey mom," I was like, "Hey mom, there's something." Like,
yeah.
So yeah, similar relationship. I think
that song for me was always like, we've talked about it endlessly on here, as you can imagine. But I always thought that it was like, kind of like the equivalent of a "Take Me to Your Dealer" poster or something back then. But then it ended up being like Tom's like actual, like it's the most sincere thing he's ever written because he loves aliens so much.
Right. Yeah. It became kind of his like big passion in life. And you know, it seems like history's proving him right more and more.
So that leads me to the final Blink question I always ask everyone is, would you say that you're more of a Mark or a Tom? Because I think that is really the divergence of humanity, really.
You know, I think as a songwriter myself, I see what's great about both of them. I mean, and also like there's I feel like there's a lot of great songs where they like trade off. I mean, let's see. I mean, like I guess in some like the real Mark Tom dichotomy is on Enema of the State. What's My Age Again is Mark, and then what was the big Tom single on that album was
All the Small Things.
All the Small Things. So in some ways, if that I can't choose that they go together. That's yin and yang.
It's so true. Okay, I have to tell you a really, really terrible take that I've been peddling for a few years now. That ties to you. I feel like I shouldn't tell you. Yeah. The other thing is like our podcast is probably not doing Time Crisis numbers, but I do think there are some people who've developed kind of a parasocial relationship with me and my co-host. And I know that, yeah. I understand it because I have that with you and Jake, and I've never spoken to you before, but I mean, it's pretty easy. I know how to talk to you because I listen, but anyway, so I feel like I might be crossing a threshold of reality by telling you this, and you don't have to answer if you don't want, but this is my take that I thought of. So I was like shit talk a few years ago before I kind of had thought about it a bit more, or maybe it's just an excuse, but I was shit talking people for wearing shorts on stage because that's kind of an old way of thinking, maybe kind of old world way of thinking. But someone pointed out, you love Vampire Weekend so much, and this was like peak Ezra shorts on stage era as well. Right. So someone pointed out that I love Vampire Weekend, and so then I think I was like I felt challenged, but then I've come up with this take, and I could be right, I could be wrong. Maybe you don't even have to answer if you don't want, but I think you should. But I think Vampire Weekend is maybe a New York hardcore band. because you had like you started with a preppy phase that you've kind of like thrown out. You can definitely pull off wearing shorts on stage, which is something only hardcore bands can do. You like have like very distinct influences that, especially early on, people would be like, "Oh, you're just ripping off whatever band," and you'd be like, "No, we're not." Like kind of this like,
right?
I mean, and the merch forward approach as well. I think is very. I personally think Vampire Weekend's a hardcore band.
Is a hardcore band. I mean, it's funny. Like I don't feel totally disconnected from that music. Also, it's like I totally grew up listening to some of that stuff. Not really going to like some hardcore shows, maybe some pop punk and ska punk shows, but like it's not. Obviously, we're not in a broad sense, but I don't feel like a million miles away from it. Like I always think about when people talk about like influences growing up, I always think to the fact that like where I grew up in northern New Jersey, I was always very thankful that it was like a very hyper specific slice of radio broadcasting, back when radio really could be your way into music before podcasts and,
American
the internet
radio programs
and internet radio shows. So but the thing I always thought about is there was two, of course we got all the New York stations, whatever, Z100, Hot 97, all the classics. But then specifically in New Jersey, just by luck, there was WFMU, which is a freeform radio station that has like all sorts of kooky shit on it. Just like truly so many like legendary DJs, like a very unique station. And then there was WSOU, which is Seton Hall University, very close to where I grew up. And it's a college radio station that basically specialized in what you might call heavy music, basically the spectrum from like hardcore to like death metal. And it was like weird that a college station would just be that specific. Right. But I always had this like slight feeling of just like, I don't know how to put it, but like growing up with WSOU and just like listening to it a lot, I just always had this feeling that's like, whether or not I'm hardcore, I come from like a hardcore place. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I think it's like the same way. If you're like from upstate New York, if you're from like Syracuse or some shit, it's like that's where they have like Hellfest. There's like just like a heaviness or something. So in that sense, I do feel connected to it. The New York versus New Jersey thing, that's a whole other conversation. But I would say that there's elements of the Vampire Weekend approach that are informed by punk and hardcore. So
saying
I'm not
saying that you're not a hardcore band is exactly what a hardcore band would say. So I think I'm proven correct right here.
You're close.
Okay, I love that you said Bouncing Souls, because I feel like that's a band that I don't think has ever come up, but I also love the Bouncing Souls, and there's something about them that's like somehow like impossibly classy compared to all the other like Epitaph and Fat kind of bands.
Yeah, in fact, maybe you can fill me in on it, because in some ways, just being from Jersey and knowing they were from Jersey, I think they lived in the city at some point too. I was just always kind of like, they were always like loomed large for me. I never really had a sense of like, on a national scene, are they, like their position? Are they like influential? Are they considered regional? I mean, I love them, but
I personally, at least right now, I personally think they feel underrated a little bit. Like, there was this like absolutely awful Warped Tour documentary that came free with Vans a couple of years ago. Like, you buy a pair of Vans, you get this awful DVD, and all the Bouncing Souls segment, it was all like the screamo bands and stuff. All the Bouncing Souls segments were relegated to the deleted scenes. And they were like touring in a truck that they had customized themselves so they could sleep in. It's so cool, but it was like you had to watch the deleted scenes to see it. So I feel like I think they're like respected, but not. They're kind of unsung. And also maybe the problem is all these other pop punk bands, you can reappreciate them from a place of irony, whereas Bouncing Souls are just like good and cool. So it's hard to ironically appreciate them later on.
No, I love. I'm actually looking at the two albums that I had the first three, but I really loved The Good, the Bad, and the Argyle, and Maniacal Laughter. Yeah, to me, Maniacal Laughter is like a stone cold classic. Track one, Lamar Vanoy, I love. Freaks, Nerds, and Romantics. Yeah, they're kind of like, I think classy is a good word for them. And I always, again, this is like back in the era I'm like 12. Like I'm kind of just like vaguely just trying to understand what all this shit means. And I will also remember like there's this picture of them sitting on a stoop, and they're all like wearing like sambas. So then I had this like funny impression, which may or may not be true. I was like, these are like smart, kind of like emotional punk rock dudes who play soccer. That's like what my take was.
I think you're absolutely right, and like sip espresso
Soccer
too.
punks.
Yeah, they're total soccer punks. They totally are. Okay, my other question about like punk and hardcore, I just got to ask you. I'm curious if you've been asked this before or not, but have you heard of this band called Vegan Reich? They're like a hardline straight edge band. And they have a
yes, but only in the context recently. Of because of the album cover.
Yeah, so I was curious, like, what's? I assume it's just like a coincidence, but it's kind of hilarious that a band called Vegan Reich has an album called Hardline about being a hardline straight edge that has like the similar album cover to Father of the Bride.
Yeah, see, that's a coincidence. Although it is the type of thing where it's like I feel like I should have known that because wait, where are they from? Upstate New York?
I gotta check. I don't even know if I've honestly. Because I thought it was so funny, I listened to their record, and it's not for me. But I do, I am straight edge. I'm not a hardline straight edge, but I do appreciate once you have the word Reich in your band name with veganism. That's not the Vampire Weekend chill vibe. I don't think. Oh my God, they're from Laguna Beach.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't know them. I hadn't seen the cover. I mean, when I saw the similarity, I was like, all right, well, it's kind of like. Maybe a weird way of what we're going for. But the funny thing is that like a hardcore band that I did know, and I remember I had at least one EP on CD of theirs was Earth Crisis, who's from upstate New York. Again, regional, a little more my part of the world.
Yeah. Although I would say Earth Crisis is definitely more kind of universally beloved for sure.
Oh, they're just like bigger?
Yeah. Or maybe not beloved, but like kind of mocked and beloved at the same time.
Because that it's like just such an amazing name, and like the Earth Crisis, like I definitely know that Earth Crisis flickered through my head working on that album because like I knew I just wanted this big fat cartoony Earth on it, and just thinking about alternate titles and stuff. I know that Earth Crisis just like I'm not going to say it was a serious contender, but it kind of like came up a little bit, thinking about the Earth, and I mean that could easily have been the name of that album. Right. It's like Earth Crisis. So. But yeah, I know Earth Crisis, not Vegan Reich.
I've just looked up their Wikipedia. I didn't even realize this, but Andy, the drummer of Fall Out Boy, played in this band in 1999. It's hilarious.
Whoa.
Amazing. I mean, obviously, imagine naming your album Earth Crisis. Like, you must do things that are going to, I don't know, get under people's skin a little bit.
Yes. I was like thinking about how to answer that. Like, you could play it cool. But, well, of course, you could probably already imagine what I'll say. Like, I'd like to think it's more complicated than that. But I do feel like, especially if you look at the history of Vampire Weekend and just like getting so much shit from people, but then also kind of like over the long term, it's not that it was easy at first, but over the long term benefiting from like the fact that people were like fighting and having conversations about topics that didn't always come up at the time. I guess I would say like I don't know. I always think like a metaphor, like, when people like back in the day when they'd be like digging a tunnel before they had the giant drills, they would have to like dynamite some shit. Everybody takes the cage back up. It's off the dynamite, blows up. Then you go back, see what's there. And I think I've always felt like there's something about that metaphorically speaks to me, where it's like if you got a gut feeling that there's something interesting in a world, you got to like throw a little dynamite down there. Like maybe that is referencing something that's bound to cause a split opinion, and then but you let that blow up happen, and it seems a little chaotic. But then you take the cage back down, ears pop, whatever. You go see, and you're like, all right, you know what? We made it a little further in building this water tunnel or something. So it's not that it's like, it's not pure like trolling. It's almost more just like, and I kind of do believe, maybe it's just because of my unique experience, I kind of do believe that like anything that actually is interesting long term will get under some people's skin in the short term. And actually, when I don't feel that, like, I don't feel a tiny bit of that conflict in the mix, I get uncomfortable.
Wow.
Because then it's like, you know, just like also, you know, we've been doing this for like over a decade now. I've seen the way that quote unquote controversial things, the controversy gets memory hold and everybody's like, oh yeah, you know, whatever, of course, that was cool. Right. And you've also seen the opposite happen, where shit that was like so, you know, rock solid, like, this is tasteful, everybody likes this, and then 5 years later the same people are like, I never liked that. Yeah. No, that shit fucking sucks, it's boring.
People like, come on our show and tell us that the only guilty pleasure they listen to is Animal Collective or something, and it's so funny to imagine.
Right, how's that a guilty pleasure? That was like the most beloved iconic, and you know, and basically, so my main takeaway is just that, like, the world is full of people who don't know what they're talking about. So, you know, like, so like, you know, go, if your gut takes you somewhere that's like a little, gets under some people's skin, it's because there's something interesting there.
For sure.
You know, not exclusively, but that's my rough worldview.
That totally resonates with me. And that's kind of like, I was definitely a late bloomer with VW, and it was Modern Vampires that just kind of, I was like, wait a minute, these songs are like, there's so many references and so much going on. And then kind of getting into that, I was able to look back at the old albums and kind of understand what you were doing all along. But I think what you're saying resonates with me in the sense of like, maybe it is a little bit of trolling sometimes, but yeah, that's a way of kind of shifting the conversation or turning things around, like a precursor to this 21 compilation. And what we do every week on our podcast is release a compilation. Last spring, we released over 60 covers of Hinder's Lips of an Angel. And it was like every genre you could imagine. There's like harsh noise. And I did like a very tasteful Pedro the Lion inspired 1999 indie rock version of it. But I mean, that actually, we like raised $10,000 for Black Lives Matter from that compilation. And
holy shit, that's amazing.
It kind of like, yeah. And like it brought us all together in the pandemic. But it was like clearly from this sort of place of being ironic and pushing the boundaries of what people consider tasteful at the time.
Totally. And I think it's worth, you know, it's a great example, and it's worth considering that for some reason in music and in art, there is like even people who like have a sense of humor, sometimes when people want to present their taste or in a certain moment, it just might be what they're looking for from art. They want stuff that's very self-serious, even though it might not reflect how they live their life. And I do think that ultimately, you can, if you start to look at, you know, if you start to expand the category of trolling from being like actively just fucking with people, and you expand it to like kind of what you said, something that has a touch of irony, but it's still kind of like pushing in a good direction, or even you expand it wide enough and it's even just something that has a sense of humor, eventually you're talking about most of life. Totally. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like I there's a way to define trolling where you're like, well, trolling is 99% of life, and 1% of life is the kind of self-serious vibe that takes up 99% of like criticism and art and shit. You know what I mean? So like, I do feel like sometimes, well, even just look, like you use the word ironic for something that's ultimately has elements that are non-ironic. And I think even irony, just ever since Alanis Morissette, people have been fighting about like, well, what does that mean? Is irony dead? That's too ironic. Isn't, you know?
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. I do want to get to the compilation. I don't want to take you for too long, but I mean, the final question of this kind of section is just like, well, not even a question. It's just sometimes, you know, I do associate you with the blogosphere because I'm similar age. I remember reading all this stuff and being obsessed with music. I kind of feel like Carl's from Hipster Runoff like accidentally predicted all of modern life. And like our entire predicament as humanity, it comes from there.
I mean, Carl's is very ahead of his time, and even just the fact that he like logged off so hard is like weirdly, like, it always reminds me of like, I'm sure you know people like this, you know, like growing up, there's people who just like start drinking when they're like 11. And not that this is not a good thing, but people who like live fast and they survive it. And then they're actually become like super grown up by the time they're like 17. And then they're like married with kids when they're like in their early 20s, almost because they like saw everything like quickly, and they kind of realize, oh damn, that path leads to nothingness. I'm doing this. And there's something about Carl's, he was like so ahead of his time, and his takes, I haven't looked back in a long time. I'm sure some have aged well and some haven't. But there's something about he like did like a speed run through culture, and there's something about him logging off so early before, and now everybody wants to log off all the time.
Yeah.
But he did that. I mean, I guess he's got a radio show, and I haven't talked to him in a long time, but
I didn't even realize he had a radio show.
I think he still does something on Sirius. But yeah, I should check in with him. I only met him in person once in San Antonio.
I would imagine he's like very
hung out at a bar.
I would imagine he's very quiet in real life.
He's definitely mellow. Like, yeah, he's definitely not like the personification of the hipster runoff voice.
All right, let's talk about 2021. I do think, it is coming from that place as well to be like, and there's people on the compilation who had never heard Vampire Weekend before. There's people who love Vampire Weekend, and there's people who basically what has happened is when we used to talk about Blink songs every week, we would play every cover we could find on YouTube, and then our listeners would start planting covers on YouTube. So then when we decided to decided to talk about any song, we're like, okay, anyone who's in our Discord, we'll just tell you like 5 days in advance what song it'll be, and then you can cover it. So we've been releasing a compilation like every week.
Amazing.
And they're like all good. Like it's so inspiring. I can't believe how good they all are. But yeah, so this was Christmas Eve. I was like, we're not going to do an episode this week, but in my mind, there was going to be like a gold rush of Vampire Weekend 2021 content right as it struck midnight that I was like, we got to get out on top of this. So I was like, yeah, we're going to release it. And then, of course, it barely got any traction until the next day. But right at the stroke of midnight, I kissed my wife, and then I hit publish on Bandcamp.
That's the way to ring in the new year. Kiss the wife and hit publish. Yeah, it's funny. When I first saw it, it's like, well, there's two things. One, I don't know when we're going to announce it, maybe in a week or two. But I also, at the very last minute, was like, oh, fuck. Like, people were like, you going to do any 2021 shit? And I was like, damn. Been thinking so much about like the next album. I was like, oh, I don't know. And actually I did come up with we're going to do something later. I don't even want to say what it is, but it's like, it's funny because in many ways it's like the polar opposite of 25 punk covers, whatever. That's another thing. So when I saw that, I was like, oh shit, I love this yin yang thing that's happening with what we're planning in this. And then the other thing that was like funny about it is like, there's the listening to the compilation and hearing like the kind of, well, obviously all under the umbrella of punk, but like the kind of genre takes and like the specific band takes, like, oh, like the Violent Femmes one,
Yeah.
It made me think a lot about, it just made me think of Magnetic Field 69 love songs, which was like a big influence on Father of the Bride. Like 2021 to me was like like the type of like short song that you might come across on like disc 3 of 69 love songs. So then hearing like a full 2021, like with the different takes and like some are super short and one or two are longer, it like weirdly tied into something that had already been an influence for the record. I don't think I actually like shouted out 69 love songs too much doing press. That's my bad. But it's like weirdly seeing that made me think of something from the genesis of the whole album. So that was kind of tight.
Oh, that rules. So you actually did listen to the whole thing?
Yes.
Well, I mean, was there any other ones that stood out to you, or did any bum you out?
No, nothing bummed me out. I think, was it the Vampire Crack? That was like it was like really noisy and like, I think like 4 or 5 minutes. Yeah. That was tight. There was one that almost had like a kind of cowpunk energy. Like, yeah, you got to forgive me if I can't remember all the names.
But to be honest with you, I've only listened to it like twice too, because I got to put out one of these things every week. So I don't remember.
I mean, I can only imagine.
But yeah, there's a lot of like folk punk, which I thought was pretty cool. I was initially
that was tight.
I was initially for mine. I was gonna do like a D beat one because I'm obsessed. I feel like D beat, like the band Discharge and all those kind of bands are. That's the epitome of like sort of self-serious punk guys that would be so funny to turn into a Vampire Weekend song. But my friend who's like in a bunch of DB bands was going to send me some stems of some drums, and he didn't send them in time. So I just like ripped the Good Charlotte drums from YouTube.
Oh, sick.
But I found it.
Wait, and also was it just like you just happened to get 25 like submissions, or did you choose 25 for any specific reason?
Oh yeah, no, that was just how many we got by the deadline, which was like the 30th. So those were all done in like 5 days, basically.
That's amazing.
But I was gonna say mine. So mine is like I found it really hard to play the 2021 lead like as a pop punk octave chord thing. So I did.
Right.
I did have to adjust my tuning a little bit for the higher octave chord. So I feel like it still has like a vibey alternate tuning kind of thing going on.
Yeah, it's funny. Like when we first started working on a live version of it, I was like, yeah, I realized how like so much of the character of what's a Harumi Hasano sample of that, specifically like the way he phrased the chords, and it is like, to kind of like capture that very specific energy, you have to like really kind of be thoughtful, but it's also fun just to like really like simplify it.
Yeah. So using that sample, I feel like also, to me at least, it seemed both, I don't know, it just seemed loaded maybe. Like I feel like that was like the peak of Hosono in culture. Like I think there was the Light in the Attic reissue around the same time, and I think I did see some people be like, how dare you sample that or whatever. I mean, was that like, did you know that was going to be a loaded sample, and how did that go?
Well, I didn't know exactly that specific, like definitely there was like more people getting into his work, although, he has such a huge career. It's like various things. I don't think certainly not when we made the song. I don't even think when it first came out had that music that he made for Muji stores been officially reissued. But, it was like floating around on YouTube. Like probably a lot of people got it in their feed. So like I definitely got a lot of people being like, I thought I was the only person who knew this song. I was like, no, anybody who's ever like listened to like a full ripped vinyl album on YouTube probably came across this at some point. So I didn't think of it as like, he's like blue chip. I mean, I could imagine somebody saying like, oh, couldn't you have gone a little deeper, picked a more obscure person? But the idea of like getting angry about it is kind of like whatever. And then anyway, ultimately things worked out kind of beautifully because, of course, when you clear a sample, you have to reach out to somebody's like company.
Yeah.
And just to get permission, but it doesn't mean you actually have a sense of like personal interaction with the copyright holder. Like you're always kind of like, you don't know exactly who you're talking to. Sometimes people are in charge of their shit. Sometimes they're not. So again, we knew that we were cleared for it, but that's kind of all you know. And then it was very tight that like a while later, he did an interview where somebody just asked him about it. And he was just like, oh yeah, I think he was like, that song was really fresh. I was like, he's like, that was great. I was very excited when I heard it. And it's like, it's just one of those things where you never know how something's going to hit.
Yeah.
But once you get the originator giving you their public blessing, then you're kind of like, all right, everybody else shut the fuck up.
Totally. Absolutely. Well, not to mention, I mean, really, it's just kind of the most sad thing about it is just thinking about like what it's like to go into a Muji, and now the retail experience is totally gone.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, it is funny. Like, obviously there's a lot of things you can criticize about various retail experiences, but there is, I guess it's just like the story of human culture. It's like, often what comes next makes you long for the compromise thing that came before.
Right.
And there's one thing about 100%. We've all been in retail experiences where people enjoyed working there, where people had a sense of community. Like, I don't know if people feel that way about Mujis, but they do. I've definitely been in a Muji on like a rainy day in New York where I was like, they're playing some like very mellow, vibey music and it smells good. And it does feel like a little bit like shelter from the storm.
Absolutely.
In a way that, even sometimes like a cafe could feel that way. So yeah, I think it is sad to think that there'll be less of those experiences, but we'll see. We'll see.
The last thing I want to tell you about the compilation, because it's been no one figured it out. There's this mysterious artist from Vancouver who just kind of makes us art all the time without us asking. So, and he just puts it all on DeviantArt, and so, like people just put things all over the internet for me to find, just using the word 155 as my guide lamp. But this is the cover for this compilation is, I guess, 10 years ago. NoFX did an EP of them covering hardcore songs, and so the twos in 2021
with the X,
yeah, like the ends are just like the N is turned sideways. So this is actually like a NoFX rip for like true NoFX heads. I haven't revealed that yet.
Oh, tight. So. Oh, that's shout out to NoFX. That was actually one of my favorite pop punk like CDs I had growing up was Survival of the Fattest Part 2. I think that was what it was called. You know that one?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's one thing that we love every week. I mean, those aren't all of the same song over and over again, obviously, but compilations are just like they're so, especially people who are our age. I think before there was like algorithmic playlists or whatever the fuck Escape Room is, like, you know, just like hearing Punkorama comps. That's how I grew to love the Bouncing Souls, for example.
Right. No, that shit was really important, and it's like. Yeah, it's hard to that feeling of just like really just like suddenly taking in all this shit at once, really feeling like you're understanding some kind of scene or even just like a snapshot of time. Even if the bands are from like all over the place, that's I can't quite think of like a internet era, social media era version of that. So it's nice to have like a throwback to it.
Yeah, exactly. Amazing. Well, I don't know. Like, so you are working on LP5 now?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's like I can't work on it exactly the way I'd like to in these strange and trying times, but yeah, you know, actually, in a way, we've made significant progress over the past year. For the holidays, naturally, like took some time off to kind of like chill. So. Yeah, like starting next week, I want to kind of get back in, assess, see where we're heading. But yeah, it's like, it's funny. Like, you know, obviously the album's going to take however long it takes. I'm going to try not to get people too hyped up when I think it's almost done, because almost done sometimes means only like halfway.
Right.
But because, you know, we're very lucky, like when Father of the Bride came out, that, you know, we got almost like a full year of like kind of touring and being out there, but still there was like this feeling of like we had these like smaller shows and hitting like some smaller cities that we were going to do in 2020, so that got cut short. So weirdly like creates this like longing in me that like, you know, just want to kind of put out another album and like get back on the road. Like there's some unfinished business kind of vibe.
It feels like it's not just that you had to cut it short or that you got some touring in, but like I feel like Vampire Weekend became a live band for the first time in a way, or just like it was the live show, it felt like it was building towards that the whole time.
Yeah, it is like, I mean, yeah, obviously it was like a different era and there's like so many changes, but it really, there's like an excitement at the shows that felt, you know, it's hard to explain. Like, I mean, you'll know what I'm talking about, but it's like, you can't always put into words, but like, you just know when like, I've played shows where it felt like, you know, it was like the end of the tour. It had just that end of tour energy, just like everybody's vibe on stage, your interaction with the audience. And there's just something about the full year, even when we got to the end of the year, we still had that like start of something energy. It did feel like our approach to the live show was building into something new. It felt like, I don't know, we had like a lot of gas in the tank left. So yeah, I still feel that way.
Yeah, damn. Well, I can't wait to hear whatever you do next. Thank you so much for finally coming on 155. If there's anything else you want to add, or do you want to plug anything? I mean, Time Crisis, I assume, is still going strong in 2021.
Oh yeah, we got Time Crisis. That's an internet radio show on Apple Music.
I think I feel like there's people here probably just for you, and there's our listeners who maybe don't have. I mean, Time Crisis is the only reason I still have Apple Music, and I haven't listened to it since quarantine because I listened to it at the gym. Like, to me, the ABBA song of the start is like me trying to convince myself to go on the treadmill. But I feel like if you like 155, Time Crisis is like a way nicer version. And then if you're a Time Crisis fan and you want a way meaner version, then come to our show. So
stick around on 155. And now you got to come on Time Crisis, because the truth is, we don't, even though it's been very important for my development, we don't talk about punk rock enough.
I know you don't, and that's what I'm talking about, this parasocial relationship. I'd be sweating bullets on the treadmill, and then you say something, and I'm like, oh my God, I need to jump in. I mean, you're missing a reference or, whatever. The other thing that happened is, so I was being a troll on Twitter. I was being mean to Dan Reynolds from Imagine Dragons, and then he responded, and then I responded back to him. I was like, do you want to hash this out on my Blink-182 podcast? And he came on the show, and he was so nice, and he showed me his Mormon ska band from his youth. It was called Super Ted, named after that cartoon bear. I don't know if you've seen that show before. I feel like that would be up your alley. But he debuted his childhood ska songs on our show, and then I became so obsessed with Dan Reynolds. And then around the same time, you were talking about how people were being so unfair to Imagine Dragons on Time Crisis.
Oh yeah, that when I saw 1975 people like that beating up on Imagine Dragons, I was just like, yo, I'm not taking sides here. I'm just trying to be just. What's going on?
Dude, we've done 2 live shows at tiny punk venues, and our on stage welcome is a video that Dan made for us. He's so nice.
No, he seems cool as hell. I'd love to meet him.
So
one
then
day.
I kind of lost I lost my mind from this, and I was like, well, Imagine Dragons is my friend's band, and that's now I love them. They're my friend's band, and I kind of lost my mind.
I love that.
And I literally drafted a book pitch that I never heard back from anyone, but I wanted to write a book in defense of Imagine Dragons, and I think secretly it was because I wanted to get on Time Crisis. I was willing to write an entire Imagine Dragons book.
Maybe I'll start a publishing house. That'll be our first. We'll sign you for that. And the last thing I'll say though is also, it is maybe this is how you feel about punk. For me specifically, ska, 90s ska, I do feel weirdly I always meet people and they have some kind of roots in that, and then we just have something in common. So I'm very happy to hear that he was in a ska band. Recently, somebody mentioned to me that Oscar Isaac, Oscar Isaac, the actor, was in a ska band.
The video
and
of
I'm
him playing that
right.
is amazing.
I was like, all right, he seemed like a cool guy. Like that.
I swear, dude, when Vampire Weekend first came out and I thought I was too cool for it, it's because I heard a ska element and I was like, oh, ska, I can't get into ska. But now, I don't know if you've seen ska.
There was a huge ska element. I was trying to kick off fourth wave ska, but none of these cowards in the indie scene wanted to join me. I was out there reffing this shit, and then maybe now people are ready.
No, now I was gonna say if you don't have a ska element, you're gonna get canceled, I think.
Right. Thankfully, we have a few in the catalog, but the biggest person in my life who has a ska background, I don't know if you might know this already, but is the main producer that I work with, has been a big part of Vampire Weekend for 7-8 years now, Ariel Rekshide. And he was in this band, the Hippos. He was the lead singer of the Hippos growing up, who were in Southern California. So he was on Warped Tour. He has amazing stories about fucking interacting with the dudes from Pennywise and the fucking, waiting online for hamburgers. He saw early Sublime shows and stuff. So it's funny, the music that I've made with him because it's more the early vampire shit where we get into some ska, working on Modern Vampires and Father the Bride. There's not too much ska,
right?
But every time I look at this dude, I'm just like, you know what? Here we are. We're talking about all sorts of other shit, but
it's the bond of ska.
Teenage ska heads.
Absolutely. Yeah. Another unexpected person I've become friends with through this podcast is Nate Roos from the band Fun and the Format.
And Nate, I know Nate.
And he loves skate punk and pop punk. And my friend and I, many years ago, had a blog called Free Punk Lyrics where we would just write punk songs in 3 minutes or less. And we just would post the lyrics on there. It's oh, if any band ever wants to use it, here you go. It was a joke. It was a tongue-in-cheek joke 10 years ago. And then our listeners found it and turned it into another compilation. But anyways, Nate is now making a propaganda-inspired skate punk EP with the Free Punk Lyrics. So it's true.
That's awesome.
These
No, Nate's a very interesting guy. He's definitely one to watch.
He's dude. I'm not joking. That he's in my DMs every day now. Like he's like.
I love that. Yeah, I like Propaganda.
I never got into them. I didn't. I always like. I like
one of the albums
stuff.
How to clean everything. How to clean anything.
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was always attracted to the silliness, and I didn't. I mean, Propaganda has a great pun for their name, but I don't know if there's much else, comedy wise.
Well, so that's half the battle. Oh, you know, I thought of one last thing that I want to shout out just because we're on this show, and I don't know. I'm sure you have at least a few listeners who grew up in the tri-state area in Jersey. I want to shout because this is a place I got a lot of these CDs. I want to shout out the Let It Rock punk rock record store on Bloomfield Avenue, Montclair, New Jersey. Very influential to me, turned me on to like a lot of shit. I never knew the dude's name who ran it. Seemed like it was kind of like a one-man operation. I hope that guy's doing okay. And anybody else who grew up going to that place, shout out to you.
Introducing for your listening pleasure.
For anyone who's been living in a dumpster for the last 10 months, it is my duty to inform you that 2020 has been one fucked up year. We wanted to rock the 40 ounce, but we rocked the 40 million unemployed. We wanted cops 6 feet under, but instead we stayed 6 feet apart. Things might not get any less fucked up anytime soon, but this is motherfucking 2021!
Pick it up, pick it up, pick it up! 2021, when you think about it, not too many, yeah, but I should have waited.